welcome back to the channel. This will be another UCL Fantasy video, this time out of Matchday 11, where we have unlimited transfers. This is my first draft, so there are some good things about it, but also room for improvement, and that's what will be addressed in future videos, like the best team, my team selection, and also on the deadline stream next Tuesday. There's also a lot of FPL content headed your way throughout the rest of the season. Be sure not to miss it by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell in the process. Let's try to get this to over 200 likes on YouTube, and let's keep on pushing towards new goals like 33,000 subscribers. You can see my UCL Fantasy League on screen. The code is cCaFxb, and there is an auto-join link in the description. The same goes for my X, Instagram, Blue Sky, the Discord server. The UCL Fantasy League, of course, is there, so I'd highly encourage you to check it out. And there's also my Patreon, so you can support the channel even further. Thank you to those that have been really supporting the channel over the last couple of months. It has been massively appreciated. All the likes, comments, subscriptions, and super chatters, you're massively appreciated. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. It hasn't been that long since Matchday 10, the knockout playoff rounds, kind of a new feature and round of the Champions League this season, which has made things even more interesting, you could say. But this is how I did, and I have to say, a bit of a spoiler alert, it wasn't one of my favourite weeks. Even in goal, both of my options there blanked. Malnoy on the Tuesday conceding to Celtic after a Kim Min-jae mistake, and then Di Gregorio, as usual, doing absolutely nothing. And one of my mistakes throughout both kind of rounds in the knockout playoffs was to go for Di Gregorio instead of Gatti to cover Juventus defensively. It was Gatti getting 11 points in Matchday 9, and in Matchday 10, despite the blank, I still think it would have been a much better acquisition going for him instead of Di Gregorio, and it also would have meant going for Donnarumma between the sticks, as PSG kept clean sheets in both matches against Brest. But my defensive line was one of the only positives. I mean, only two of these options, by the way. Hakimi and Bacho did the business. Kim Min-jae made the mistake for that Celtic goal converted by Kun, but he at least got some ball recovery points. But the villain of the entire week was Theo Hernandez. Just as I was logging off of my deadline stream and everything was hunky-dory, this guy decides to get sent off. He gets a second yellow card for simulation, and you can't even blame the referee. He made a great decision. He deserved that second yellow. And Theo Hernandez cost his team as well in the end, because AC Milan were 1-0 up at the time, and they ended up crashing out to Feyenoord, and that leaves only one Italian team left in the competition in Inter Milan, because Atalanta were another squad that also suffered a big upset at the hands of Club Brugge. But those PSG defenders really carried me across both match days in the knockout playoff rounds. Hakimi with assists in both matches and a clean sheet, and William Bacho finally got some ball recoveries in Matchday 10. He was slightly underwhelming in Matchday 9, but ultimately he got the points in both matches, and you can't really complain too much. But I have to hold my hands up. Theo Hernandez was a poor pick. He's been terrible all season. I've never really recommended him in any of my videos, like the best limitless wildcard or best teams in general, so that was a mistake of mine. And while my defenders were decent picks on paper, I did get rid of some good options like Schlotterbeck, who kept clean sheets in both matches against Sporting, and you've also got Gatti, of course, who was very costly in Matchday 9 in particular. The midfield wasn't much better, to be honest. I also got Dembele as my captain. He was the only one to really blank in that PSG team, despite them winning 7-0 for a combined aggregate score of 10-0. So he was great for me in Matchday 9 as my original captain, so that was all fine. But for him to blank in a 7-0 win was very surprising and frustrating. He has been on fire in this calendar year, and you can forgive him for one off day. He's got a great record against Brest as well, and he scored braces and hat-tricks in every single meeting against them this season, but he did blank on this occasion, and that was a big disappointment. His team at Barcola, at least I didn't sell him, but he was the one who would have been a much better captain. The same goes for Hakimi, who I highlighted as one of the best options, particularly on the Wednesday as a captaincy option. Christian Pulisic, though, very underwhelming, and Feyenoord have the worst defence of any team left in the competition. I thought AC Milan would score more goals, and it didn't take them long to open the scoring through Santiago Jimenez, but that red card from Theo Hernandez changed the entire game completely, and Pulisic was a doubt going into that game whether he would start or not, but that was the early kickoff in the Matchday 10 deadline stream, and ultimately, because he was in that lineup, I decided to keep him, and he's been very frustrating ever since. As for Jude Bellingham, I bought him back for Phil Foden. That was a mistake that cost me 4 points in Matchday 9, but it's nothing too major in my opinion. So I bought him back, but he got a yellow card. He is now suspended for Matchday 11, and in terms of UCL Fantasy on the app and website, you will not see any of these injuries or suspensions being updated until next Monday, so essentially one day before the deadline next week. But Jude Bellingham has been very underwhelming for me whenever I've owned him this season, and some of his biggest returns have come when I haven't had Jude Bellingham in my setup. Let's complete this matchday review with two very poor forwards on the day. Vinicius Jr. blanked. He got a ball recovery point at least, whilst Guirassy missed a penalty against Sporting. That summed up my entire week. So across both matches in the knockout playoff rounds, the PSG players carried me. Dembele, captain in matchday 9, did the business, but not in matchday 10, unfortunately. Barcola was disappointing in matchday 9, but then made up for it in the second leg. And Hakimi and Bacho were the only consistent players for me across both rounds. So if you really look at it, it has been very underwhelming across them, and that's why I got back-to-back red arrows. As for my bench, Manuel Neuer, Harry Kane, Musiala and Jim City, they all blanked, and that's why I made those substitutions. That's the way you want to play UCL Fantasy. You put your Tuesday players in, your starting 11, and those that are yet to play on your bench, then you make the subs, and that's why I always recommend going for a Tuesday captain first, and then switching it if needed. But let's look at my rank and also my points. So as you can see, probably my worst match day of the season and perhaps that I've ever had. It's definitely up there. I think match day 2 was also very poor from me. 48 points and my rank went down by only a few thousand places, but still, it's never nice to see a red arrow. It's now 41,000, which would be my worst rank by far actually in UCL Fantasy. I've got a great record in this competition and I'm looking to bounce back, and I'm fairly confident with a wildcard in my back pocket. I can be more aggressive, at least in the round of 16 or quarterfinals, and the wildcard can bail me out of some of these kind of short-term picks who might get me a lot of points in 1 or 2 matches, and then once their club is eliminated, I can remove them with the use of the wildcard. Now, if you're unsure about how transfers work now, they're pretty much the same as last season and also in the last couple of campaigns, because we are now in familiar territory with the knockout stages. So you get 5 free transfers for the first leg of each round in the quarterfinals, semi-finals and the Champions League final, and for the second leg you get free transfers available. But at this moment in time it is unlimited, and that's why you can't play the wildcard or limitless this week. If you've got both chips available, my advice will be to use the limitless in matchday 12 for the second leg, and then wildcard in matchday 13 or 15. So essentially in the first leg of the quarterfinals or the semi-finals, which is my current plan, but ultimately it is team dependent, and depending on suspensions and injuries, that might change, and that's why I'm going to adapt to different situations with a wildcard and also my free transfers. But let's delve into some of my transfer plans, and I'm going to highlight one change in each position. So the goalkeeper, defenders, midfielders and forwards. And one key move I'm looking to make is Neuer to Kobel. I'm not really backing Bayern Munich for a clean sheet in either match against Bayer Leverkusen, despite the fact they faced each other only a couple of weeks ago. Leverkusen absolutely destroyed Bayern Munich, but it ended up in a 0-0 draw. They had 5 big chances. Neuer had a great performance on the day, but ultimately, I think Kobel has a much better chance of keeping clean sheets against Lille, both home and away. So I'm very optimistic about making such a move, and I'm not saying this is locked in because there are other goalkeepers I'm looking at, but I think Kobel might be one of the standouts for match day 11 at least. And going into the quarterfinals, should Borussia Dortmund make it there, I'm not too optimistic about Dortmund's chances going forwards, but that's why the wildcard can be very helpful to me. I can get Kobel's points in match days 11 and 12 and then pull the trigger and get rid of him for a better long-term goalkeeper from now until the Champions League final. As for the defender, Hakimi to Gabriel does seem a bit strange, right? Because Hakimi is the highest scoring defender in UCL Fantasy. He was one of the only players to not let me down in the knockout playoff rounds, but the fact that PSG are playing Liverpool, that puts me off entirely. The only PSG assets I'd still consider include Hakimi, Dembele, and possibly William Bacho. I don't think Nuno Mendes is particularly shabby either, but in terms of clean sheets, I don't see one being kept against Liverpool across both matches. So then you're really relying on those attacking threats from Hakimi and all these different assets, and he can certainly do it, but I just don't think it's really worth it, and his points will probably come to an end. I don't see him returning big in any of the matches, but I'd happily be proven wrong, and maybe Hakimi and Paris Saint-Germain have a big surprise in store for us. With Arsenal, I'm not as confident about them going through now as I would have been a couple of weeks ago. Their attack is down to the bare bones, which only puts more pressure on that defensive line. But in the Champions League phase, they finished 3rd in the table, conceded 3 goals and only 1 from open play. So they can be very solid when needed, and maybe the Champions League will suit them in terms of their play style. But I think the Arsenal attack is just toothless, and I think 1, maybe 2 assets is enough. You can pick 4 players from the same club, remember, just like you could for the knockout playoff rounds. I definitely wouldn't be doing that for Arsenal, and Gabriel might be in the lower end of the pecking order when you're comparing him to my other defenders in my first draft. But let's now look at the midfield and one possible transfer I could make in this position, and that includes Bellingham out, who is suspended, to Rafinha, who's bang in form. He got 2 assists in a 4-4 thriller in the Copa del Rey against Atletico Madrid, and Rafinha is right up there in the Ballon d'Or rankings. Only Salah, you could say, is above him right now, and maybe Mbappe is also entering that podium. It should be very interesting, and maybe the Champions League winner will determine who wins the Ballon d'Or. But Rafinha is almost essential in that midfield, and his ownership is actually lower than I would think it is. He's so cheap and offers tremendous value. If it's between him or Yamal, I pick Rafinha all day long, and I've said this since the summer actually, when Rafinha had around 5% ownership at the time. So I'd highly recommend Rafinha if you don't have him already, and there are certain options in this game, particularly in the midfield, that kind of stand out above the rest. But in UCL Fantasy, you do have an expansive game with so many different options, and that's why the template isn't as strong as it would be in FPL. And finally, before I go into my provisional team for the first draft, Harry Kane out to Mbappe is another transfer I'm looking to make, and I did sell Mbappe from Matchday 8 going into Matchday 9, and I got Vinicius Jr. That went well for me in the first leg against Man City, but that hat-trick at the Santiago Bernabeu completely killed me in Matchday 10, and it maybe was coming because I did mention Mbappe's underlying stats. For example, against Brest in Matchday 8, he had 4 big chances. He got 1 assist, to be fair to him, and he has been quite consistent with the odd goal or assist, but he's never really gotten those big returns in UCL Fantasy until that hat-trick, and maybe there are a few more in store for him. Now, you can still go for Vinicius Jr. I think he's a great option in UCL Fantasy, and on certain occasions, he will rise on top, getting the big returns and Player of the Match awards, and he has done that so consistently this season. Whilst Mbappe, he might be very frustrating at times and missing big chances, but the form he's showing recently across all competitions is staggering. He's getting brazen hat-tricks very consistently, and he's also scoring clutch goals for Real Madrid, even against some of the best teams in world football like Atletico Madrid and Manchester City. So I think Mbappe is very likely to be in my final team, but it's going to be between him and Vinicius. I don't see myself going for both, because as good as Real Madrid are and those two forwards are, I would rather diversify that attack, because you only have 3 slots and we have so many different options like Harry Kane, who should still be considered, not to mention some of the others you're going to see in the next section. So let's build this first draft for Matchday 11. Remember, it's unlimited transfers. You can pick 4 players from the same club. And between the sticks, I'm going for a Tuesday goalkeeper, and it's going to be Kobel facing Lille. And very shortly, I'm going to talk about an underrated option for Wednesday, because Inter Milan had a major injury between the sticks, and I'll talk about that very soon. But I think Kobel might be the best goalkeeper for Matchdays 11 and 12, despite Borussia Dortmund's struggles in the Bundesliga. But they did win 6-0 in the recent game, and the likes of Pascal Gross really stole the show with 4 assists, and also a certain man up top that I'll talk about as well. As for the defensive line, I really hope they do better than the likes of Theo Hernandez in Matchday 10. De Vrij, I think, is a very solid choice. He is the highest scoring Inter Milan defender. Dumfries is more exciting, but I think De Vrij might be more nailed on, and he's also got the ball recovery potential. I bought him in Euro Fantasy around the quarterfinal stage in the summer, and he did very well for me, so maybe there's a bit of bias behind that pick, but I think De Vrij could be very sound in that defensive line with 5% ownership as well. Gabriel isn't locked in for me. I think he's the worst of my defenders at the moment, but if Arsenal can get their act together, I think a clean sheet against PSV is possible, particularly at the Emirates. But going into Eindhoven, I think Arsenal could lose that game and potentially concede 2 goals, but we'll wait and see about that. Gabriel can still salvage something through his really good attacking threat, especially from set pieces, and also ball recoveries, which he is quite good at as well. The same goes for Schlotterbeck, who was outstanding last season as Borussia Dortmund reached the Champions League final, and he also did the business in the knockout playoff rounds. And I actually put Kobel and Schlotterbeck in my best team going into Matchday 9, which was met with a lot of skepticism, which I completely get, but in the end, they turned out to be excellent picks. So I think Borussia Dortmund might thrive in Europe again, and they could be like Arsenal, where they struggle in the league, but they can do it in these cup competitions and go on a decent run in Europe's most prestigious competition. Let's now go to the 4 midfielders, and I've got some excellent picks in here, in my opinion. Rafinha, Salah, Wirtz and Adeyemi. The latter is more of a punt, and there is one possible issue with this draft. Apart from the fact that we've got more Wednesday than Tuesday players, there's also the fact that I might have gone a bit too overboard with Borussia Dortmund, who are still not reliable completely. But Adeyemi has been very consistent in the Champions League this season. He has blanked on 1 or 2 occasions, but he's also gotten some massive returns, and that includes goals and assists against Sporting across both legs, ball recoveries, and Player of the Match awards. So I think Adeyemi could be a very underrated pick in this midfield. And as I mentioned earlier, Pascal Gross got 4 assists this weekend in a 6-0 win for Borussia Dortmund. Florian Wirtz got an assist in a 2-0 victory for Bayer Leverkusen. They are kind of far off Bayern Munich in the Bundesliga, but they still had a fairly decent season. It's just kind of pales in comparison to the last campaign where they set records and almost went the entire campaign unbeaten. Mohamed Salah, I don't really want to talk about him too much because if you watch my FPL content, you will know what I think about him and his returns. He has been so consistent. He is leading the Ballon d'Or charts for a reason. There's still a long way to go in the season, but if he keeps this up, I think there is going to be no doubt about the eventual winner. I think Rafinha is one of the only players who can rival him in terms of the consistency, the goal and assist output. And in terms of Barcelona and Liverpool, they are 2 of the best teams in the world right now, and they could face each other very soon in the Champions League, and that would be a great matchup indeed. But I'd highly recommend Rafinha, Salah and Wirtz, and then you can go differential with your 4th and 5th midfielders. But I think those 3 are almost essential at this moment in time. As for the front line though, it is a bit different because you've got so many options and only 3 slots to really go for. Vinicius Jr. misses out narrowly, and he could be introduced in a later draft and maybe in another video coming up very soon. But I've gone for the informed Kylian Mbappe right now, and Guirassy scored 4 goals in that 6-0 win for Borussia Dortmund recently. And in the Champions League, he's only blanked once. Unfortunately, it came in matchday 10 after missing the penalty, but he's been outstanding in the Champions League this season. And Lewandowski just offers great value. I'm surprised he cost less than 10 million, to be honest, but he's someone I kind of lacked throughout the entire league phase, and I always wanted to get him, but I just never really saw an opportunity to really go there, and that was probably a mistake of mine on certain occasions. But I'm very confident that going into matchday 11, Robert Lewandowski will be in my setup. Kylian Mbappe versus Vinicius, that's something to debate, and also Griezmann and Alvarez shouldn't be discarded because they both scored in that 4-4 thriller against Barcelona, and so did Robert Lewandowski. Essentially any big attack you can name from both teams scored, even Sorloth with the late equaliser, and Yamal got an assist. These Barcelona and Atletico Madrid attackers offer great value, but my preference will be with the Catalans because they have a more appealing fixture against Benfica. They have faced each other already this season. It was a 5-4 thriller, and Barcelona ended up shading it just about. Rafinha scoring in the last minute. He scored a brace overall, got player of the match, and Lewandowski also got a brace as well. And I think Atletico Madrid versus Real Madrid could be cagier, as we have seen over the years in the Champions League. Let's also talk about my bench very quickly. I do have a Martinez in there as my backup goalkeeper, but it's not Emi Martinez from Aston Villa. It's actually Josep from Inter Milan, because we could see Sommer out for the next month, so you would expect Martinez to start in both matches against Feyenoord, and he could be a transfer waiting to happen for the quarterfinals should Inter Milan reach that stage. But I think that's where the wildcard could come in for me, or my multiple free transfers. Remember, you get 3 available moves for the second leg going into matchday 12, and then 5 free transfers for the first leg of each round. But I think the wildcard could bail me out, and I could go a bit aggressive and really chase these kind of 1 to 2 matchday punts like Kobel and Martinez in goal. I've also got the likes of Elise, Grimaldo and Van Dijk, so I've got one Bayern Munich attacker there in Elise who has shown a lot of form, albeit the lack of goals and assists could be slightly concerning, but even Musiala, for example, isn't getting too many goal contributions in the second half of the season at the moment. Grimaldo just has that attacking threat always. He creates multiple big chances and makes key passes in every single game. He's an exciting defender to own, albeit very template as well. But I think Grimaldo is probably worth investment. I think it could also come down to a triple up in a certain defence like Inter Milan, but because I've already got double ups in Borussia Dortmund and Inter Milan, it's probably best for me to diversify the rest of my defensive line, and that's why I've got Gabriel, Grimaldo, and also Virgil van Dijk. I think a clean sheet away to PSG is unlikely, but Liverpool are currently the best team in the world, and I think they could definitely keep one at Anfield, where that is a fortress, especially on Champions League nights. Now, with the captaincy, the standout on the Tuesday looks like Kylian Mbappe right now, despite the fact he's facing one of the best sides in Europe in Atletico Madrid, but he did score in the recent Madrid derby, and I think Mbappe's form has been just too good to turn down. He hasn't got many double-digit hauls in the Champions League this season, but he did get that hat-trick against Man City last time out, and I would back him to have a big say in who goes through between Real Madrid and Atletico. If I need to, my Wednesday captain will be Rafinha, but that could easily be Robert Lewandowski. I'm backing another high-scoring game between Barcelona and Benfica, so going for an attacker with the captaincy could prove very fruitful, like it was the last time these two teams faced each other. Other considerations for the captaincy include Mohamed Salah. Adeyemi would be a massive punt, but he has got a 23-point haul already in the bank this season, and the entire front three could be captained. Guirassy just scored 4 goals, and his Champions League record has been outstanding this season, and Mbappe and Lewandowski have already been discussed. I don't think Florian Wirtz would be a captaincy option for me away from home against Bayern Munich, but he's not a bad shout, and defenders can also be captained, especially on the Tuesday, but their ceiling won't be as high as these midfielders and attackers. Even the likes of Hakimi, for example, who would be a consideration with a high ceiling for a defender, they are facing Liverpool, so I'm not too optimistic about captaining Hakimi or any defender in Matchday 11, but things could change very quickly, and maybe I'll share a different view. Perhaps Denzel Dumfries, for example, could be a great shout in that defensive line. But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. What would you change with this first draft? I think the main issues is the fact I've got 4 Borussia Dortmund players overall, and Lille have caused issues to some of the best teams in world football this season. They beat Feyenoord 6-1 in Matchday 8. They also went to Anfield with 10 men and put up a very good fight, and they also beat the likes of Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid, so maybe I'm overestimating Borussia Dortmund and kind of underrating Lille in this case. So that's one possible issue, and I've also got more Wednesday players than the Tuesday, and ultimately I want to pick the best players in general, right? And the Tuesday-Wednesday balance is a secondary factor when deciding how to build the best team for Matchday 11, but that's something worth considering, and maybe adding 1 or 2 more Tuesday players could be the best thing to do with my UCL Fantasy team. That wraps up another UCL Fantasy video and podcast for the season, this time out of Matchday 11 with my first draft. There will be more videos coming your way, and next Tuesday there is going to be that deadline stream where hundreds of your questions will be answered, maybe even more. And if you want to see a best team for Matchday 11 with some differentials highlighted, then let me know down in the comment section below, and like this video, getting it to a 200 overall on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell to never miss a single upload or live stream. Follow me on X, Instagram, and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and the championships, for early access to my videos, amongst many other perks. The Discord server, UCL Finance League, and Spotify can also be found in the description. I wish you all the best of luck for Matchday 11 and the rest of the tournament, and I'll see you next Tuesday for that deadline stream.